All right, it's recording. So welcome to South by Southwest digital experience. And here on the Future of Music track, today we are going to host a featured session panel with 3 distinguished guests from the world of music, business, and to have a conversation about the intersection of both of those industries and the role that alcohol plays in both of them, for a title session titled The Intersection of Music, Business, and Alcohol. And before I introduce our guests, I just want to set the stage a bit for this conversation, which will bring attention to alcohol's role, our relationships we have to it in industry and in culture. For years, we have lost members of the music communities to substance, and recent tragedies have amplified calls to action, while at the same time, inequities towards alcohol have favorably defended the substance. So we have this predicament where there's the rise in the sober curious and the alcohol-free lifestyle, kind of bringing this conversation to a public stage. And then the other question is, is this the fad? Is this the trending tide? So we're gonna unpack all of that today. Where we meet each of our panelists are on stages, in business, at network events, in breweries from coast to coast, and I've been able to meet each of them over the past couple years in those locations. So I wanted to bring them in so that we can explore everything from attitudes, consumer trends, interpret lyrics, understand our affinity or dependency or favorability towards alcohol and the role that it plays. The first person I want to bring in is Bill Shufelt, and he is the founder of Athletic Brewing Company, which all outlets have been calling you the leader of this craft beer revolution that's happening in North America. And I'm excited to have your perspective on this, given your background, where you've come from, what you're in now, and the behind the scenes conversation that you've shared about where athletics going. So welcome to South by, Bill.
Thank you so much. You're way too kind, and we're just doing our part, but we are really excited to be here and thankful for the audience, and excited to share some of our learnings from the past couple of years as we've tried to kick off this revolution, as you said. Excited to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. The next person we're going to invite in is a genre manager from the Recording Academy, but before that, her resume is incredibly impressive with the tour management that you've been doing. So Shannon Herber, welcome to South by.
Wow, thank you so much, Richie.
And I'm excited really to dig into a lot of things that we're going to share, but I won't give any of that away yet.
No problem.
The final panelist that we have is in the music world, and she's part of the dynamic dance duo Sophie TUKKER that arrives to this panel at South by with 2 Grammy nominations and currently calling it leading the world of live streams. I know you just hit 50 live stream days today. So Sophie Hawley-Weld of Sophie TUKKER, welcome. To kick this off, so everyone can understand about the roles that we have in our lives and the role that alcohol is playing into it, I wanted to help shape this conversation by giving each person the opportunity to start with, what is the role alcohol is playing in your life? And for that, it can be professionally, socially, a personal relationship, whatever is most comfortable and you think is most important, that will set the stage for this. And if we want to start off with you, Bill, given that you're brewing a beer, but it's a beer without alcohol in it.
Yeah, and that's, exactly what we try to do is brew great beer that just happens to not have alcohol and a fraction of the calories. Really, to touch on my relationship with alcohol and how athletic brewing came into being, it was really a positive, healthy choice just in a modern lifestyle. My background was in the finance world. I was in the hedge fund world for 12 years, working at a large hedge fund. And kind of every area of my lifestyle was performance-based. If that was being on the clock at work and having to be super sharp, waking up in the morning for workouts, going for longer. I was getting into the world of endurance sports on the weekends, but also like I really wanted to be mindful and present with my family and my wife as well. And as I was turning 30, I was starting to eat like a very heavy plant-based diet, a lot of organic food, really monitoring my inputs and seeing how that made me feel in all these performance-driven areas of my life. And it really hit me all of a sudden that alcohol was kind of inconsistent with every one of those buckets I just mentioned. And I stopped drinking for a month while I was training for a trail ultra marathon. And before I knew it, it was the easiest thing to let go in the world, because it was kind of a positive cycle that just kept feeding on itself, where I felt better, I performed better, I was more focused and attentive and mindful with my family. And it was just a virtuous cycle that, so it's been 7 years since that moment, actually. And 2 years ago, we created Athletic Brewing to kind of meet that void in the world where there just haven't been good options out there for people making choices, positive choices like I made in my own life.
And we'll definitely dig into where the roots and the origins of athletic comes from, because the industries that both Shannon and Sophie are in have alcohol plays a role in them. And it's something from the stage, which Sophie, you're out there every night on, and all the way through to Shannon, which I am excited for you to share the behind the scenes of your years in this field. But before we get there, where are you encountering alcohol today?
Personally, I mean, what's interesting is, I've been in the industry for about 20 years now, and it's such a big thing within the culture in terms of your networking as a label executive, as a management person, as a tour manager, as anything to do with the artist. A lot of it revolves around going out to dinners, or going to have drinks, or just doing whatever the artist's doing, which obviously involves alcohol. And so, after a while, I was sort of personally like, I just don't want to do this anymore. So I nowadays tend to sort of err more towards, I wouldn't exactly call myself, sober. I enjoy a drink every now and again. But as far as like what I'm doing when I'm working, or even whether or not I keep liquor in the house, I definitely don't do that anymore. And it just, kind of simply came down to something as simple as, I just didn't want to have a headache in the morning. I wanted to be able to get up and be productive and go work out or whatever. So, I think there's ways to approach this that don't even necessarily have to come from someone having a really strict problem with it. It could just be as simple as it doesn't fit my lifestyle anymore.
And that's, it's like what I'm going to ask you later about messaging and how it's introduced. So I have a little note to really hit hard with you on that there. Before we get into that, though, Soph, I also want to invite you in and ask, where are you encountering alcohol in your life, or what's your relationship to the substance today?
I probably about the same time as Bill became sober, about 6 or 7 years ago, which was pretty much exactly when I was legally allowed to drink. I went to a boarding school in Italy, and drinking was a big part of my high school experience. And similarly, I started doing yoga. I went to a yoga teacher training, and as part of the yoga teacher training, they asked us to be sober, and they asked us to go plant-based. And so I did both of those things, and I just felt so good for that month that I basically just kept it going. And again, it was this virtuous cycle of all the work that I was doing in yoga to try to be more present and try to feel in my body and, be kind to myself and to others. I just felt every time I would drink alcohol, it would go against all the work that I was doing. So it just naturally fell out of my life. And then when we started the band, it was, I was probably drinking once every couple of months or something. But it was really easy for me to say, you know what, now that it's around all the time and it's just assumed that it's, a part of the experience that I go into, I want to become the person who will always say no, so that it's easier for me because it's just around all the time. And I find it easier to always say no than sometimes say yes and sometimes say no, because then it's just like, too complicated, and I knew that things could get tricky. And so I made the decision right when we started touring and really kind of being in the music world and nightlife to be completely sober. And now, I mean, it's not even in my life that much, because I think it's just the status quo that I don't drink, and people around me tend to know that. And then also most people around me don't drink anymore either. And I think it's kind of built a community of people who are similar. But, you know, it's around when let's say we're opening for a band, and like maybe it's more in their culture, or if somebody's opening for us and it's in their culture, or it's at parties. But I feel like I've also kind of built a vortex around me of people who get me and respect me and don't, you know, ever even ask anymore. So I'm really happy to have a life without alcohol that is very like party focused and really fun, and I partake in all of the like ecstatic experiences that I want to, but just without any substances to make it sustainable.
Thank you. What, in all three of the responses, there was the business role, that it's in your life, not just socially with friends, but at a networking event, or Bill in the finance world, Sophie saying at clubs, like where you're doing business, alcohol was also present. So as you got to the latter moments and the latter years of your alcohol use, you're drinking less, you don't want to have that drink, yet everyone around you still is. What was it like navigating those moments? And Shannon, I want to come to you first on that. Being in the entertainment capital of the world, being backstage, being with touring artists, alcohol can be this community bonding agent. It could also be gifted to you at a venue. How did you start navigating that?
Well, I mean, what was really interesting is my, you know, sort of similar to what Sophie was saying, my personal decision to kind of start, you know, backing away from that aspect of the industry coincided with my starting to work for a sober artist. And so, you know, I learned a lot from working with him in terms of, you know, how we could make things happen, and what it looked like to go on tour and, you know, not personally have alcohol in, you know, in like the A group, or, you know, what would happen if, you know, for example, we went to Mexico once, and, you know, he is a musician, but he also is a DJ. And so, you know, those two worlds can be very different. And so we went to Mexico once for a DJ show, and, you know, the sponsor of the whole thing was a really, really premium tequila brand. And so, you know, the gift to us the minute we showed up was this giant bottle of, you know, super premium tequila with his name all over it, really fancy, all those things. And then, you know, they leave, and he just kind of looks at me and is like, so do you want this? You know, like, and I actually ended up giving it to my dad. You know, so I mean, it was funny in that, you know, we both were kind of like, okay, what do we do with this? We appreciate the gift. Thank you so much. You know, we understand that they're trying to make us feel good as, you know, he's the headlining performer. But at the same time, it was very interesting to sort of be like, so did you do any research on your artists? You know, and to kind of navigate that world. But yeah, he really helped me a lot. You know, he's a big part of a lot of sober communities, and just, you know, going on the road with him and kind of seeing little things like, you know, he was really big into everywhere, you know, you have to have a juicer everywhere, and you have to, you know, you want to do yoga. And so we would do like tour yoga and things like that. And so I think when I met Sophie, you know, a lot of what she had said to me about how she and Tucker do their tour really resonated, because that was what I had just experienced. So.
And Sophie, having followed you on social media and seeing what you're promoting, you know, doing yoga or putting up an Instagram story from a Peloton, showing that you're invested in your wellness. When you are on the road, I probably don't have the right word for it, but you arrive at a venue and there's like a menu of stuff that will be in your green room backstage. How much control do you have over that? You know, how many times are you going to submit and say, I want a coconut water, and in turn, that fridge will actually be filled with beer, or you'll have the bottle of vodka, or the tequila will be gifted to you, like was gifted to Shannon in Mexico?
It totally depends, and it's changed a lot throughout our career. So like the smaller the venue, or if we're an opening act, like we have very little say. But then if it's a bigger venue and you know you're getting paid more and the venue's getting more financially from the experience of having you there, then we have a lot of say about what's on our rider, and we're very specific. So there's a lot of coconut water and you know water, and that's kind of it. And we used to like have a small bottle of Grey Goose that we had for people that came to the dressing room. But I think that over time, we've just attracted a lot of people who want to be good to their bodies. And I think it's very contagious. So then they come to our dressing room and it's almost never drunk. So I think we actually took it off the rider. But yeah, I mean, we have quite a lot of control, and we try to be really intentional about it.
And so rider was the word I'm looking for. And that's, Bill probably take a note and think, rider, that's something that Athletic can get on. You are, before coming to Athletic and attracting that community of people who were curious about not drinking in an alcohol-free lifestyle, you were in finance. I had heard you introduce yourself with that. Now, we've seen the movies, and we have this idea of what the finance world might look like. New York City, dinners, Thursday nights, Tuesday nights, that's taking out clients. Did you have that same experience prior to arriving to your current relationship with alcohol?
For sure, and it helped me get there for sure. But the world is changing fast, and the dichotomy between when I entered finance and when I left finance in that 12-year period, when I came in, it was such a badge of honor for people to be hungover after a big client event on a Thursday or Friday morning. And if you weren't, it was almost like you weren't trying hard enough. Like those extracurriculars were a big part of the industry. And I know finance isn't alone. I heard Shannon talking about Hawley-Weld. I can imagine it's identical in how like entertaining goes. And so much of the sales world in general is like that. And like every business is sales essentially in some regard. But when I, like over that period, the transition was incredible. Like the younger generations of millennials and Gen Z just don't drink nearly as much. And everyone cares, like as a society shift in general, everyone cares about their performance and how they feel and what they're eating. And when I left, over half those client events were more likely to be like a morning Bears boot camp or Soul Cycle or a workout class rather than an evening steak dinner. Like, you can only have so many steak dinners and ruin your Fridays, and you don't want to be hungover and like ruin your weekends. And so there's a huge shift going on, and I think all those things are really accelerating, especially right now with what's going on in the world.
That's really exciting to hear. And I think we'll dive into that a bit more with the behind the scenes and the messaging towards the end of this. But I want to get right into it. And Soph, I want to come in and ask you a question.
Hit me with it.
As a musician, I've gone to concerts and it says doors are at 7. So I get there at 7:30, yet the headlining act that I went to see doesn't show up on stage until maybe 10:30, 11. And I've realized and understood that, you know, that time between, yes, there are the opening acts, but most of these venues sell alcohol and it's priced higher than what it would be at a bar or at an off-premise type retail outlet. So the direct question is, do you feel that you're part of the alcohol industry?
I definitely have never framed it that way for myself. I think one could make the argument that I am a part of it in some peripheral way. I wouldn't say it that way. I think I'm part of the music industry, and the music industry and the alcohol industry are closely related. But it's not something that I feel is under my control, because I'm not in a position at the moment to say, you know, there might be some artists who can do this, who can say, hey, venue, I'm coming to this place, like, alcohol isn't going to be on your menu tonight, just so you know. Like, if you're getting us, that's the condition or something. Or, you know, you have to have a variety of beverages and snacks that are not just alcohol or something like that. I think one probably could do that. I don't think I'm in a position to do that without it really hurting what I'm trying to do. So, yeah, I mean, yes and no, maybe. I don't see it that way.
Shannon, if you were on a team with an artist and behind the scenes you were saying, yeah, I wish there wasn't maybe alcohol at this venue tonight, or I wish there was an alternate focus, would you have ever felt comfortable bringing that to a venue or bringing that to a promoter or any type of festival and demanding some sort of equity on a menu or a reduction of alcohol's presence at a concert?
That's a really hard question, because the margin for most venues is really made up in food and beverage. You know, it's very much like the restaurant industry, where they're paying a really big, you know, top dollar for sort of the entertainment that they're bringing in, but the way that they recoup that is not necessarily through ticket sales or anything like that. It's through what those people buy, what the consumer buys when they're on site. And for most venues, that's food and beverage. And like you said, the markup on alcoholic beverages is so high that that is the primary moneymaker. You know, as a production manager, part of that is when you hire a venue or you rent out a venue, you know, a lot of times they make it a portion of your contract that you can't bring in any outside food and beverage because that's where they make their money. So I think, you know, to Sophie's earlier point about, you know, it really depends on like how high on the bill your artist is, you know, what the goal of the festival is. I think there are some festivals that are, you know, more health and wellness focused. So if it were something like, let's say, a Wanderlust, you could definitely do that. But to be honest, that festival probably is already doing it on their own because that's part of their vibe, right? But if you're going to Hardfest or something like that, that's kind of the antithesis of their vibe. And so it's not going to be well received if they book you and then you roll up and you're like, no, I can't have any alcohol within like a 10-foot radius of my tent, you know, or my stage. And then they're like, well, that's not going to happen because that's how we're paying you. So, you know, it really, really depends on like, you know, what level of the bill you're on, what the vibe of your festival is, what promoter it is, what your relationship with that promoter is. You know, I mean, at this point, unfortunately, I think in the industry, there's just so many variables there that unless you're Beyonce, you maybe aren't making those, you know, that's not a call you can really make if you want that venue to stay profitable.
And that's a response that had you asked me 6 months or even a year ago, I wouldn't have maybe been as compassionate towards, because I didn't have this type of education, and I would have been a bit more aggressive and had that penalty box type talk where it's like urging a lifestyle to be adopted. But I've really come to, in private and public conversations, understanding, you know, there's individual choice. There are, like you said, so many variables that might go into it. Bill, one of those variables, you brew a beer, and I've purchased a non-alcoholic beer, a mocktail at a concert, and it's been equally priced. So hypothetically, a venue could still potentially meet those margins. In your experience, are venues, menus, places where live music is being performed, are they open to conversations about inviting in the non-alcoholic beverage category?
They definitely are. And it was the traction, the education's gotten a little bit easier. Like if you can get cans in hand, it's definitely helps. There's some more progressive venues out there from some very big operators who are super open to it. Like MetLife Stadium, where the Giants play, and there's a lot of concerts going through. They've started to carry our beer. And we're going to be in the Los Angeles Coliseum starting in September too. So
Awesome.
like, and that's an agreement we're super excited about. And then here in Connecticut in the Northeast area, we're in a lot of local music venues as well. I think those places are really starting to understand that there's this myth of alcohol marketing that has been incredibly effective. And it would have you think that 95% of people drink every time they step outside of their house, where really 50% of adults have 0.1 drinks or less per week, and 80% of adults have less than 1 drink per day. So it's like, there are a lot of people out there and attending anything from bars and restaurants to concerts and sporting events who aren't drinking every time they attend. And these vendors are realizing they're missing a huge percentage of their potential sales and sponsors for the events too. And in attracting a non-alcoholic brand like ourselves, we speak to a certain percentage of their audience that is much bigger than it was 30 years ago, say. And we're really trying to change that dialogue and do it in a positive way where some of the words like sober and like they're very prohibitionist and outdated, where like a lot of people are flex sober, like kind of like they're flexitarian in their diets, where they may drink 1 night a week, but they probably don't drink 6 nights a week because they want to feel good and get about their life. So we want to meet those people there, and like we don't want to be soapboxy. We just want to provide good options for those people who aren't drinking 5 nights a week, or they're at a concert with their kids, or they may have a beer when they get to a concert, and then in the second and third sets they may want to wind down with some other beverages before they drive home. So there's a lot of occasions even within the night of drinking itself that these places are missing on. And so we've been able to kind of upsell these venues a lot recently, and that kind of really appeals to the modern adults who are attending these concerts.
Speaking from experience, the last concert I went to was actually in LA. It wasn't at the Coliseum, but it was across town over in Hollywood, and they had non-alcoholic beverages, and it made it much more comfortable for me on a Wednesday night to then drive home and wake up the next day and be like, I feel pretty great last night. And it was fun to be at a alternative rock type concert with a beer in my hand. I was like, I felt like everyone next to me I brought the energy up, and they saw me and welcomed me more. So thank you for what you do there and kind of like pushing through and getting into those venues. On the venue side, I still want to stay on stage before I go backstage. And Sophie, it's not meant to be a difficult question or an aggressive question, but you do have a song called Benadryl. Mm-hmm. And that song talks about a substance that some people at one point in life may abuse. And it's not alcohol, it's not a harder drug or a harder substance, but listening to it, what responsibility do musicians have with their lyrics? If musicians are role models for impressionable youths and we want to emulate our role models, sometimes is a lyric to be considered a bit more because it could potentially misguide or mislead, and where do you fall with this?
That is a hard question. I think that responsibility in lyrics is deeply personal, and I don't have any blanket statement for all artists in terms of how they view their own responsibility with their own fans and what their relationship to their fans is. And I also think it's changing over time. So what I felt was my responsibility a year ago is actually very different from how I feel today, based on how I'm changing as a human, and also how my relationship with the fans are, and also like even the magnitude of people or the age range of people. And I'm seeing a lot like younger, like when I see more and more and more young girls in the crowd, I totally changed my shift on what my responsibility is in terms of how I'm speaking to them, because in the past, I was seeing people who were 30 plus in the crowd, by and large. So it's changing. I don't entirely even know the answer, because I think it's something that I grapple with and something that I don't necessarily want to be so obsessed over that I then like make lyrics that are just like, brush your teeth and, you know, floss every night. Like, I don't want to do that. That's not interesting to me. And I think it like is not authentic. And I don't like preaching. So like, I don't even talk about being sober almost ever. A, because I think the word sober is a little bit divisive. And B, because I kind of want people to find that out if they want to find that out, but not push it down anyone's throat or like lead with it. People think I'm on ecstasy every night. And like, I think it's kind of cool that people think that I might be, and then they can find out later that I'm not. But in regards to lyrics, I think like that's not a question that I've completely even answered for myself. And it's something that every song we write, there's a line somewhere where I'm like, is this a little bit like too, could this be interpreted in the exact opposite way that I meant? And like, how intense is that interpretation and the possibility of that interpretation? So with Benadryl in the bath, I remember writing the lyric, and at the time, honestly, I was abusing Benadryl. It wasn't a super serious thing, but like I was using it to fall asleep because I was really having issues with sleep. And I also used baths to fall asleep because they helped calm me. So that was like personal and relevant. And I wasn't telling anybody to do it, but I did see some posts afterwards of people being like, I just took Benadryl and I'm in the bath. And I'm like, no, what did I do? So I don't entirely know. I think every song is different. Every stage of my career is different. I'm sure I'll look back at songs and be like, oh, you know, if I had just changed that pronoun slightly, like that would have been cool because then it wouldn't, you know, have gender stereotyped that. Or I think I'm evolving, and that might have been further back in my evolution, perhaps. But I also don't, you know, I don't regret it, and I don't think it's a huge deal. It's just something that I have to be somewhat aware of, as long as it doesn't cripple my own creativity.
Thank you for being open to answering that. That song came to me. I was in maybe a year or two ago in a like spin class, and that came on as one of the cool downs, and come back to talk to you about that song. So it's a beautiful song. Like, it's a fantastic song. And as someone who's seen you in concerts, and specifically at Coachella last year, I can attest to questioning, are they on some sort of substance on stage because of the energy and how bright and energetic it is. But talking with you and understanding that that's just your brand, and like your word is energy and love and joy, that hearing you that now articulate that is, it's really cool to hear behind the scenes, behind the lyric, behind the performer of who you are. Continuing behind, and this is to come off stage, Shannon, I want to talk to you about the entire artist ecosystem that on stage we may only see 1, 2, 3 people, but there's 15 people. There are sound engineers, LDs, tour managers, production managers who have the same rigorous schedule, sometimes maybe more, sometimes the later night for loadouts and an earlier day for a load in. What is the experience like for the crew on tour, physically demanding for their body, for wellness, and is alcohol a communal bonding agent that's used to bring crews together early on a tour?
Oh, for sure. I mean, at least in my personal experience, you know, it obviously can depend on what level of tour that you're on. But, you know, for any of those sort of smaller van tours, or, you know, then you get to like the mid-level, you know, bus tours, you know, before you sort of get to like a plane tour and things like that, where you have like maybe multiple crews kind of leapfrogging, you know, over each other, things like that. If it's just sort of, you know, a crew of up to maybe like 15, 16 people and you're kind of all together, then yeah, I mean, like you just said, when you roll up to a venue, that's obviously when a crew's job starts. And, because they have to then, everybody has to get out and you've got to start loading into the venue, and the tour manager has to, sort of start talking to the venue, things like that. And so, find out where you can park the bus, find out where your day rooms are for people to go take a shower, so it's like you're instantly working. And so that means that, maybe many times your work day is from 7, 8, 9 in the morning until 1 or 2, 3 in the morning the next day, if that's when you leave to do an overnight. And so because of it, a lot of that can be, okay, it's finally 1 o'clock in the morning, you're all done working, you hop on the bus. What's the first thing everybody does? They all open a beer, they sit in the lounge, they chit chat. And for some people, it's definitely something that, they do, sort of like what Sophie was saying earlier, to help put them to sleep. But for others, I think it is sort of that, like you were saying, the communal aspect of, okay, we just had a really hard day, we can sort of decompress together. But again, I mean, what I think has been really interesting, as far as what Sophie's been saying in terms of like being the artist, is that you do create that vibe. And so then you bring the people that agree with you or have a similar lifestyle to you together. And so then in that way, you're able to sort of decide what that decompression looks like. And so if everyone's decompression is, I get to eat, my quinoa salad that I ordered from the venue earlier, and I get to drink it with my coconut water, then great, that's what everybody's doing. You can still build community. You're all still chilling in the lounge. It's just what are you using to sort of create that? What's the communal thing you're all doing together? And so, I think in terms of the alcohol aspect of it, it really does depend on the artist. I've definitely had a lot of artists who, their thing is drugs, their thing is drinking, and they bring that with them. And it can be, especially for women in the industry, it can be a little rough and tumble, because I don't know if Sophie's had the same experience, but I've also found that those artists who are more focused on health and wellness also tend to be a little bit more female friendly and a little bit more equality friendly. And, they're not trying to prove some aspect of cultural necessity or some aspect of, masculinity or whatnot. And so there does also seem to be a little bit more of a continuity between those who are more open to working with women in sort of a crew aspect, and then those also who don't drink and do drugs.
How, Sophie and Shannon, how do you split responsibilities of leadership on a tour? Whose responsibility is it to come down and be the disciplinarian, and whose responsibility is it to groups and kind of set that tone, or is it shared?
I wanted to respond to what you said earlier, which is, I do think that it starts with the artist in terms of who they hire. So like the tour manager might be the person that ultimately is going to like be the rule setter, and they have to be the good guy and the bad guy, because the artist can't be that person. It's just not appropriate. But the artist can hire somebody who they share values with. And so we went super, super, super out of our way to A, hire a woman who's a tour manager, B, hire, everybody on the team has to be a feminist. That's just a prerequisite for the job. Everybody, we talk about lifestyle before you're hired. So we have probably more than half of our crew is sober. It's not a prerequisite, but it's definitely something that like we want the culture to be very sober friendly for the sake of all of us. And I think it's totally true that, the kind of masculinity around alcohol is also what I really had a like allergic reaction against. And it wasn't just alcohol. It was like the first tour I ever went on. I remember I would get on the bus at the end of the night and I was like, I'm going right to my bunk. Like there is no community like stuff happening, because I just don't vibe with, even if I vibe individually with these people, this isn't how I like to come down or get up. So I'm going to go to my bunk. And there were also like no females.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Sophie, hearing you talk about tour and performing, Shannon, hearing you talk about 15, 18, 20-hour days for a crew, Bill, you and I are both on the outside of music. We've never been on the tour bus, but I heard your arrival was through performance and through sports and athletics. And I know following your ambassadors and your without compromise mantra, I wanted to pose a question to you. And this stems from, I've read that the New York Times article about the German Olympic team using non-alcoholic beer as this recovery agent. But even before that is viewing artists and their crew as something beyond that. And the question is, are you feeling as well that performing artists and their crew are athletes? They're performing every day on their feet, and that output has an equivalence, if not greater than.
100%. So I actually wanted to just respond to stuff that Shannon and Sophie said too. It's amazing how the whole world ties together. Sophie, your vulnerability in sharing what you're going through, it takes a star like yourself and sharing those personal experiences to kind of help knock down the stigmas around sobriety and or even flex sober, telling people what you've gone through. This is your journey. This is your playful past. It makes it all so approachable, and it will help just everyday people come to these good, healthy conclusions. So I thought that was awesome. And Shannon, what you were describing too, one of our big things at Athletic is not being a soapbox company. The world is such a stressful place, and people wind down in any number of ways, and people just need to de-stress. And it's great if you want an alcoholic beer or a non-alcoholic beer, or you want your quinoa salad. It can be whatever brings that community. Everyone needs to de-stress together in communities. And so we're all about inclusion, not being on a soapbox, and making whatever choice you're making approachable. But that kind of dovetails to what you just asked, Richie, in that it's funny. Some of these people who are such stars are coming to similar solutions that Sophie did, where in our world, we do have a couple of musicians we're teamed up with, and a lot of really high-powered athletes. And athletes really up to the top of the major four sports have reached out to us organically and said, hey, I don't drink. It doesn't fit at all in my season. I'm drinking your beers anyway. Maybe we could work something out. And that could be Ben Hoffman, a super elite Ironman. He was drinking our beer for a year and just reached out organically. Today we talked to a World Cup winning rock climber who is these people are reaching out organically because it is their lifestyle. And yeah, it is that people need good fuel to fuel high-powered lifestyles. And so that's what we're definitely after.
That's exciting. It's cool to see the amount of people that arrive to this organically, and the origin of this panel is having that intersection, and your response being able to associate and identify something in Sophie's response and parallels between your industry with Shannon is extremely interesting. Pre-organizing this, we did set out and ask for audience questions to come in, and the final question before we jump to that is about messaging. And I've heard each person individually say something along the lines of, when you start urging and pushing a lifestyle on, or you're on your soapbox, that you want to avoid that type of stuff and somehow nurture a natural arrival to investing in someone's wellness. So what messaging do you take? And Bill, I'll come to you first on this and go around to give everyone an opportunity. But if you could sum up in a phrase, what is your messaging towards someone that may be confronting their relationship or evaluating their relationship to alcohol?
Yeah, our whole motto is brew without compromise. And that's both a noun and a verb. You don't have to sacrifice anything in your lifestyle, the quality of your beer, the social experience you're having, anything along those lines, your relationships, your friends, your athletics. You can do everything you want and not have to sacrifice anything to have a great beer and be social. And that's what we're all about. Yeah, we just don't want we're trying to make it so when people want to make healthy choices, they don't have to give up a huge part of their life. And so we're all about positivity, aspiration, and inclusion.
In professional settings, Shannon, say you're out and it's a networking event and there's wine being tossed around or champagne and you decided to not partake. Do you anticipate that there may be a question coming to you saying, hey, why didn't you? And has that happened? How would you respond to that? Because right now it's a minority position.
Mm-hmm.
But as more and more people are normalizing this, what are some messaging techniques or a message that you're conveying in response to that?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had that before. I think, what was really interesting is when Sophie mentioned earlier that sort of people always think she's on ecstasy. I could totally relate to that because especially being in the EDM world, there is sort of this assumption or, thought process. I think also in the community aspect that everyone's doing it, that it's part of what EDM is. It's part of what dance music is in whatever way dance music, is what you're doing. And so I have had the reaction before where I've said, oh, thank you so much, but I don't do that. And I think some people sort of start to internally take that as a judgment when I don't mean it as a judgment. I just mean it, that's for me. But then, their defensive reaction is to say, oh, are you square? Or like, oh, do you not want to do that? Or are you judging me for it? Like, no, I'm totally not judging you for it. I'm just a super control freak. And I don't like, having an altered consciousness personally. And so, I did have to kind of learn how to say like, no, it's just not really, I've got like, I would start to lie sometimes even and be like, oh, I have an allergic reaction to those things. So I would always make it about me so that person didn't feel like, I was judging them at all. And then as I got older and felt more comfortable in my skin, then I just kind of was like, nah, it's not for me. You do you. I'm totally about it. Whatever makes you happy is fine, but it's just not for me. But thank you. I appreciate the offer. Thank you for bringing me into your community. So I would kind of like try to turn around into a positive thing. But as far as alcohol is concerned, I would love it if there were a non-alcoholic option. So I could go to dinner or whatever and have that vibe with everyone else instead of like sitting there with soda water that, kind of like is a beacon to everyone like, oh, you're not drinking, right? Mm-hmm. So if you want to like be on the low and not really, tell everyone that this is what you're doing, it can give you sort of that middle ground where you can feel like you're with everyone. You don't have to advertise that you're sober or whatnot. But you don't have to sit there with like your water. So,
Sophie, on the messaging conversation, I want to avoid putting you in a position to have a message to other artists, but I want to focus on fans for a second. You mentioned that fans may think you're on ecstasy, or fans may think you party hard because you're at a club at 4 a.m. posting an Instagram story. Have you had experiences or conversations with fans where you say, oh, I don't drink, I don't take drugs, I meditate, sleep, and eat well? What are those conversations like if you've had them?
I love these conversations because for me it's been so long that like I am extremely confident being the weirdo or like that person, and I really enjoy that role actually, especially with other artists when they're like, when I get offered a drink and I say no, and then they're like, what? Like that's an option? And I'm like, yeah, it is, and I love being able to be that voice for people. And especially in the dance music world, like especially at a club, people literally will look at me like I have 4 heads and sit and be like, I didn't know genuinely that was an option. Mm-hmm. And it just like, it thrills me because I'm like, hell yeah, it is. Like I'm having way more fun than anyone else here. Yeah. Like, and that's powerful. It's like a superpower that, I just really enjoy. And I think with fans, like I haven't really publicized it at all, but I think that might evolve. And I think maybe I just wouldn't use the word sober. I don't know exactly, but I think I'm like more ready or more wanting now that our music is more established to share that story more. And it just wasn't appropriate before, I think, because we needed to lead with the music and not with like any alternative kind of thing that we're passionate about. But I do feel that it's probably time to introduce that story a little bit more into my narrative.
Well, should you choose to do that, I'm sure Bill will have some other terms besides alcohol-free kind of being in the revolution. But as a fan and peer, I'm glad we have this recorded so I can share around that bit that you just shared, because it really normalizes it. And I think you see it with other artists that you're normalizing just your lifestyle. And it's as much about your abstinence from alcohol as much as it is other practices that you keep to invest in yourself, because it really does impact your career. So I think I speak for a lot of people that we see that and admire it, and it's meaningful. Before we kind of go to like the closing statements, the closing ceremony, there were 2 questions that I selected that came in. We touched on one a little bit, but I want to return to it. And it's, what can be done at concerts and festivals and sporting events, any type of gathering, to make them a bit more inclusive. And I don't want to use the word sober friendly, but what can be done to make sure that there is a seat for every single person in that arena or in that venue? Sophie, I'll go back around and kind of start with you if there's any thoughts you have on this.
Yeah, I don't think that I have the answer. I think this is a question that I'm meditating on, let's say. I think that there's definitely a role I play as the artist. And I think part of maybe sharing my narrative more will be a part of that. I think that fans that are aware that the artist is not themselves on anything changes a dynamic a bit than an assumption that we are. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a part of it, and that's something that I personally can do just by sharing my story in a way that feels inclusive, non-judgmental, however I end up kind of sharing more of it. And it also makes more sense now that Tucker, my bandmate, is also basically sober. I don't think I've seen him drink in more than a year, but he doesn't use that word. But I think the fact that it's both of us also makes that narrative a little easier to tell, mm-hmm. rather than just me. So yeah, I do think it not begins, but the tone setting and the culture setting does begin with us. Like, no matter what the venue is, if people are going to a show and they know a lot about the artist and they know that the artist is sober, I do think that changes the relationship with how people are even thinking about whether or not they need to be on any substance. And I think there's a part of what we do that we see, and I see as energy work. And, I think there's something very spiritual and very profound about doing music and that kind of energy work while you're sober, because I think that there's something a little more present and true about that kind of exchange. So I don't want to be a soapbox, and I don't want to alienate people who choose to drink or choose to do whatever it is, but I do want to set a tone of a culture just by telling a story that we're trying to do a type of work here that's meaningful and profound and really fucking fun that doesn't require any substance.
And Shannon, the same question, and you've been on both sides. You're been a fan, but you've also had those conversations with those who are creating festivals and owning venues and putting it on. So is there anything that you'd like to add that you could see being done to make this more friendly and inclusive to someone who's choosing not to consume alcohol that night?
Yeah, I mean, I love that you're doing this with someone like Bill, who's, running Athletic Brewing, which is non-alcoholic, but, is giving people that option. That's perfect. That's the middle ground, because it doesn't hurt a venue, it doesn't hurt a promoter. You know, it allows them to buy a product similarly to them buying an alcoholic beer, and then they can still do their markup to get their margins, but they're still, you know, giving that option to their crowd, to the, you know, it makes the artist feel better. So it's going to help Sophie decide, like, oh, you know, if we had a choice between two very similar venues in a city, you know, would we maybe go with the one that does serve non-alcoholic, you know, options, because that is better for our fan base, you know? So there's choices you can make throughout the process. But that being said, yeah, I think what Bill's doing is the answer, because it's not going to hurt anybody's profit margin, but, you know, it's also going to give the artist a way to feel good about, you know, what they're doing, and give their fan base the option. So I love that. Yeah.
Bill, I'm tempted to not even let you answer after that endorsement, but I'd love to hear if you have anything to add to that before our final question.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Shannon. I agree with everything both of you said. Like, it's about not being soapboxy. It's about, if people walk into a stadium and they have a choice between alcohol and a super sugary soda, you're probably going to feel just as bad having either, so people go with alcohol. If you have a whole range of like tasty, healthy, premium options that people are psyched about, like, sure, it might be a craft non-alcoholic beer, but it might be a sparkling tea. It might be a good kombucha. It could be a really cool mocktail bar with like a bunch of seedlip like type mocktails at it. It's, I think it's so long overdue that like the word drinking is separated from drinking alcohol, because like 50% of the population that doesn't apply to. So I think there's a lot of margin and inclusivity to be had at venues. And it really bleeds across all the worlds we're all operating in. So,
hearing that, would I be wrong to make the statement that having a non-alcoholic beverage on a menu or in your venue is very similar to maybe 5 years ago having a veggie burger, where it's kind of like, hey, why not?
Yeah, I do think there's so many parallels with plant-based diets, and it's just one of these, like, the impact goes so far beyond that moment when you're consuming it. It's the carryover effects, and that could, in plant-based eating, it spills over to the environment and the processes and everything like that. In drinking alcohol, it spills through your whole lifestyle and your relationships and your performance. I think there are a ton of, I think the words vegan and sober have a lot of similar threads, and they're both really, they have so much positivity and have this like crazy light they're looked in by society. And like, people can be vegan for an hour, a day, a week, and like any amount you choose to do that, that's a positive choice, you know? So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually want to just quickly kind of riff on that, because the same artist that I worked with who was sober is also a very well-known vegan. And so I've lived both of those lifestyles. And I think one thing that is great, that I love what Bill's doing in terms of like flex sober, or like finding another word, is, you know, let's also remember that there are counter cultures to those things in mainstream, right? Mm-hmm. Where just as much as vegan stands for this like amazing plant-based lifestyle, there's also a lot of people who really don't like vegans, because there are some hardcore vegans who are very soapboxy. And so I think if we can find words that say, you know, like, I really love plant-based lifestyle, because there's no judgment, it's very middle ground. It's like, this is just what I've chosen to do for me, but I don't have to be like vegan, militant, straight edge, you know, like there's a lot of even aggression in those words. And I think the same is true of sober. It's like, it has such baggage and such a connotation of like, well, I had a problem, so now I can't drink. When what we're really trying to get to is, this is the choice I've personally made for me, and that's all it is. Mm-hmm. So I think once we start to get like the nomenclature right, I think we'll be able to open up to more mainstream, you know, with these things.
I love that. And I did not know that. So you went through sobriety and veganism together. Just
oh yeah, there was no fun on the tour. Just kidding. No! Totally joking. Plenty of fun.
It wasn't my intention to save this question for last, but I wanted to follow the flow of conversation, and this one will probably be shared by both Shannon and Sophie. And it surfaces safety in environments of alcohol specific for females. Sophie, you being on stage, potentially seeing people in the crowd drinking alcohol, knowing someone who looks inebriated. Shannon, being a female in an industry that has been historically male dominated, and if it's an industry that has people consuming alcohol, it's a heavy last question, but has alcohol had ever amplified your awareness in how you should, like, be aware of safety? And like, is that something where you're like, hey, I really, safety first, like safety comes up where maybe for a man in that environment, I'm not thinking about it as much.
Yeah. So, you want to start, Soph?
Whatever. Go ahead. I'll go second.
I mean, I can answer an emphatic yes to that. That is, like I sort of mentioned earlier, part of the reason that I say I'm such a control freak and that I don't, I don't do drugs or drink or whatnot, is because those are actual things that I've seen happen and that have happened where, you're in a situation where maybe you are the only female or it's you and one other woman, and, either her drinking has gotten her to a point where, it's unsafe for her now because you can see that someone is trying to take advantage of the situation. Or conversely, even if it has nothing to do with your drinking, the drinking of a man has gotten to the point where it's now unsafe for you and unsafe for that situation. And that could be just as easy as I went to dinner with my boss and he drank a lot and he's my ride home. It doesn't have to be as, unfortunate as a sexual situation or something like that. So there's all manner of, being in that situation where it's your job, it's your career, and also you as a woman can't drink as much as a man and still be okay. Or, you doing that puts you in a situation that could be physically harmful. So, not to mention, there's all the other societal issues of, well, if she gets drunk, she's seen as sloppy and unprofessional, whereas if he gets drunk, he's seen as like, he's just having a good time with his artists, and, he's normal like us. So, yeah, there's all kinds of gender differentials that led to, this is why I don't drink in public, or this is why I don't overly drink. I'll have a drink with my boss to show that I'm part of the community, but I'm not going to get drunk. I'm not going to do drugs. I respect myself and my professionalism more than wanting to, do that. So it's really tough. It's really tough. And, to kind of continue on with the soapboxy idea, when there have been other women that are good friends of mine in the industry that I can be like, hey, I think it might be time for us to go home, then I do that. But I can't necessarily jump in and save somebody else who doesn't want to be saved. So, it can be really hard.
Amen. I don't understand. I mean, I do understand. Definitely part of the reason that I became sober was because I was also only hanging around guy DJs. Like, that was my entire community, was just dudes at clubs. And so for me, it became a no-brainer to say an absolute no ever.
Yep.
Because it just would have ruined everything if it just became a no-brainer. And I really get very upset and don't know what to do when I'm on stage and I'm looking out into a crowd and I watch very frequently, almost every night, a situation in which a man is in some way taking out whatever he believes masculinity should look like on a woman. Either the man is intoxicated or the woman is intoxicated, but it looks sloppy, and and it's really deeply upsetting. I wish that dynamic didn't exist, and I definitely think alcohol just exacerbates all of the negative stuff around masculinity for sure.
Yeah, agreed, 100%. And you're absolutely right. I mean, especially I think, like, we were talking about in terms of like dance music and what happens, it is really hard. And then you as an artist, how do you can't possibly stop your show and be like, hey, don't do that. You know, like that's not, it's just not something that we
I mean, even apart from gender, I had this one show, I was on stage and a woman, extremely drunk, came on stage and just groped my boobs.
Oh, what?
Full on held them. Yeah. And because it was a woman,
right,
it was very confusing. Because Tucker wanted to push this person, but didn't feel like he could push them while it was happening. I was just in shock and very confused.
Right.
It was like the presence of alcohol way more than it was this person. Obviously, like no one sober would do that.
Right.
But it made me just very confused as to what to do and how to handle the situation. Gender aside, just alcohol induced relationship between artist and crowd. Like it's, I don't know. I am down for people to like do what they do, however they do it. But if people become, unsafe themselves, or if they put me in danger, it's just such a shame. And I don't necessarily know what the answer is in terms of how to like enforce moderation. It's really difficult.
No, I mean, you make such a good point. Like historically, shoes getting thrown at artists, beer bottles getting thrown at artists, like you said, people climbing up on stage and doing crazy shit, people climbing up on rafters and on speakers and things like that. And then they fall. And then who do they sue? The venue and the artist. Yep. So, it's like, alcohol absolutely, even though I think we don't want it to be a part of the process, it is. And it can really lead to some bad outcomes for safety for the artist.
There's a flip side, which sorry to just keep talking, but I think it's very interesting because there's this other side of things, which is showing up to a venue that is like buzzing with energy and looseness and vibration is also really awesome as an artist because it makes our jobs a lot easier. And I think that alcohol plays a big role in a very, lubricated, loose dancing crowd that doesn't have inhibitions, which is much more fun to play to than a bunch of people who just got off work and it's 6 p.m. But then so I'm grateful for alcohol in some ways.
Yeah, totally.
It makes my job a lot easier and a lot more fun. It's so I don't have a relationship with alcohol where I'm like, oh, I wish I wasn't in venues, because also a lot of people don't know how not to have inhibitions.
Yeah.
What's clear is I think alcohol's role in culture is complicated. And Sophie, thank you for sharing those more intimate stories. Shannon, you as well. Bill, for all of your contributions to this. And Sophie, you ended your previous response with not saying, I don't know the answer, but it's clear as someone who's been able to digest and hear everyone's contribution that it's trending in a direction. You just appearing and speaking and sharing about this does normalize it. It lets me know at one of your shows, I'm incredibly welcome. Bill, you're letting me know going to certain venues and sporting events that I can look just like my friend who might be drinking a Bud Light. And there's a lot of comfort in that. So to all of you, an extreme amount of gratitude for being open to joining a public conversation about this. Who knows where it goes from here? I know there'll be a lot more of these conversations. It seems like this is not a fad, that this is a trending tide. And yeah, thank you so much for adjusting your schedules. We're supposed to do this March 16th down in Austin, but now we're doing it from about 4 corners of the United States right now on several time zones. But thankful to technology for letting this work for us. So thank you all. Thank you for joining this panel.
Thank you for putting it together. I think this is such a great topic, and I'm glad we're all, such a diverse panel of viewpoints, and it's been really, it's really uplifting to hear.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Richie. It's great to talk to you guys. And I think it's a really great, modern, evolving dialogue. And hopefully we can do it in person in Austin next year.
Yeah.
That'll be exciting.
Yeah, thank you all for all that you're doing in this space, and it is helping to kind of clarify my own role and position, and it's helpful for me.
Nice.
Awesome. I'm gonna now click end broadcast. It might kick us all out. I'm not entirely sure, but if it does, I will introduce everyone on that email thread and share. Bill, I'll do something in the email thread. Okay.
Cool.
Let's see if this.
Bye, everybody.
You guys, if you want me,